Hello, this is Tom from the Fired Steel Forge, and today we're going to be looking at some tips and tricks to look for when picking out antler for knife handles and different odd projects. Okay, let's get going. Okay, as you can see here, we have a selection of different types of antler and different grades of antler. So let's look at each and what each one is good for. Okay, let's start off with Mule Deer antler. Native North America, and probably the worst antler that you can use for most knife handle projects, but there are other projects you can use them for. The issue being is that the center core area, where all the soft, like the pith, if you're thinking of like wood, it would be like the pithy area, and that's going to be soft. It's not going to hold up to a lot of abuse, but it is easy to core out with a drill. So if you maybe want to use them for making little containers, things like that, that would work out pretty well. The only other issue is that you don't get a lot of good meat area around the core to use as carving materials. So this would be more for small containers where you're going to leave the outer skin surface showing. Okay. Next, let's talk about elk. Elk has some really beefy antlers. Again, the problem with elk is that you get a lot of the core area, but they do have a pretty nice meat area around them also, and the texture of the outer skin is very nice also. Elk can be used to slab, where you'd like cut slabs out of the outer skin to get the meaty area, which is good for carving. Or you can hollow out the cores and make large containers, such as coffee containers, or I don't know, if you just want to store stuff in there for traveling, or just to put on your shelf or in your cabin. And you can see, try to get close here, the meat area you'll find is pretty random. Like here we've got that really good white meat area, and that's what you're really looking for in a good carving antler. This is going to be the really nice colorful white meat that will contrast your pigment a lot better. Here you can see where it's a little bit more gray, and that is still completely usable for carving, and if you're just kind of going for a different look, that's totally fine. And you can see here in different areas of the elk, the core is smaller. So these would be good for maybe buttons or different things. So you kind of have to just cut up an antler and see what you get. Nobody really knows as of today that why a antler gets denser or a larger core for any reason. We don't know if it is the area which they live in, the environment, the things that they're eating, how old they are. It's kind of hard to tell, and that kind of goes for all antlers on all antler-bearing animals. We do know that the older the animal is, the larger the antler is going to be in general. So that's just something to think about also. Okay, next is whitetail deer antler. And you can see here that the core area is much smaller in conjunction with the meat area than a mule deer, for sure. And usually the coloring of the meat area is generally better also. It's more white colored. The downfall with whitetail is that it's pretty hard. It's more of a brittle antler, but it is strong. So if you're used to making knives, you'll think of it as more like a hardened blade compared to a tempered blade. But it is extremely strong nonetheless. It's just that when you're carving it with a sharp implement and trying to get a clean line, the lines tend to chip out on the edges a little bit more than a softer meat antler will. But these are super good for knife handles because you don't lose a lot of antler when you're trying to fit a handle. You're trying to, like, this is a crown piece. You normally, find a crown piece that fits good in your hand, and one that lines up, has a nice curve and whatnot for a handle. And you do still have a little bit of core, so it's easier to drill out and fit the tang into the handle. But you've got a lot of meat on the sides so that it is stronger when you do fit it up. These are good for making buttons and just all kinds of things, pendants. A lot of people make antler rings. So whitetail is pretty good all around. We can also see that whitetail comes in different grades. So here is one of the best pieces of whitetail that I've found here lately. And all the antlers that I get are either sheds from the area. A lot of the ranchers will pick them up, and I'll get them from the ranchers because they pick them up in the fields because they'll pop the tires on their tractors, so they don't like them in the fields. Sometimes some hunters do give me antlers every once in a while. Personally, I haven't gone out hunting for probably 14-15 years, so not that I don't like it, I just don't seem to make the time anymore. But here you can see where the pith area is super small on this, and it has some really good meat coloring here. Here it's a good example, you can see the outer skin here. So if you're grinding off so you didn't have the outer skin look, this would be the outer skin. And then you have this kind of a darker membrane area between the outer skin and the white meaty area. that is great for carving. This is something that we need to consider when we're doing a project, especially if we are going to carve, and if it is going to be on a knife handle. We need to size the antler so that this area, the meaty area that we're going to carve, is going to be the size of the handle that we want to have. A lot of people, they just find a really nice piece of antler like this, and then they kind of fit the antler itself to their hand. You know, this is going to be the size of my handle. Well, it's not. If you're going to have a nice carved handle, you need to size it for, where do we go here? You know, we need to size it for that meaty area that we're going to be carving on, because this membrane will always show up as kind of a shadowy gray, and it just won't look as nice unless that is the look that you're going for, of course. Another way to use antler is to slab them. We talked about slabbing the elk antlers. This is a piece of elk antler. And it's just, you can just barely see the rough texture of the inner core. So I've got a little bit of the skin that you can see, but right under the skin is this whole area here is pure meat area. So this is all great for carving on. It'll pick up your pigment super well. So these are pieces, if you can't save you know, the antler for a different project, you can slab them like this and cut these up into little pieces and use these as inlays, either in antler or in wood, and it leaves a really nice contrast. You'll find this a lot in Sami style knives and knife sheaths, and also in kuksas. They'll have a lot of antler inlays. Next, let's look at another piece of whitetail. This is a really old piece of whitetail deer antler. It's still good, you can still use it for different projects, but what's the issue is here, if I can get it in frame, is these tiny little cracks. You can see that this antler was sitting on the ground for quite some time, and the outer skin is starting to crack. So you'll just have to be concerned and work that into your project if that is what you're looking for. Sometimes it can look really nice. It kind of gives the illusion of being a fossilized ivory. So that's one thing that you can use that for. But just remember that it will be a little bit more brittle in those areas, just as ivory would be. Okay, let's move on. This is a piece of reindeer antler. It has a really nice sized core, but what's kind of strange about this is it has the outer skin, and then it has a really thin membrane, the gray, and then it has a nice core, meaty core, but then it has another thin membrane right before the core. And you don't see that too often, but it is something to look out for and work into your projects. Lastly, we have a slab or a button or a concho or whatever you want to call it of moose antler. Moose antler is one of the densest antlers. I believe moose and reindeer would be your two most dense antlers. Caribou also. Caribou is just a wild version of a reindeer. Reindeer are domesticated. This one has a sheen to it because I've sanded it to a higher gloss here. But you can see where all these different colors of shades in the antler. You've got some really nice white areas, but some really dark areas also. But what's nice is that even the core is really dense. So you can use these for buttons, and it's not going to rip out the center. You can use them for carving on end pieces. Let's say maybe you're going to make a cap for a container or something. This would be a really nice choice because you can even still carve on the core and it won't pick up too much pigment around it. You will seem to find that a lot of moose will have a lot of coloration in there, and that's fine if that's what you're looking for. But a lot of people will slab moose antler, and that's how you really get the really good white meaty areas on a moose, it seems like. So these are all tips I hope you can use in your projects. And okay, these are all tips that I hope that you can use in your own projects, and hopefully it will help you understand what to look for in antlers when you're trying to pick out antlers. There are other ways of whitening up antlers. The traditional way, at least northern Scandinavia and Scotland that I know of, are that you would put the antler shortly after you found it. Hopefully it would be a fresh find on a drop antler. That you would put it in a cold running stream. You would tie it, stake it in there, and just let it kind of float around in the cold running stream for at least 1 year. And this will leach out all of the blood from the antler, and it will give you a much whiter antler. Another way that you can do it is hydrogen peroxide, and this works well. It's definitely a lot faster, but it will leave the antler a little bit more brittle if you're trying to do fine line carving, such as the Sami style. Another thing that you can do when you do find a good antler to carve is right before you carve it, let's say 20 minutes, half an hour before you start carving, you can wrap the antler in a warm, wet paper towel. And this will soften the meat of the antler. So if you do have a more brittle style of antler, such as whitetail, it will help so that you don't chip out your lines as much. Okay, well, I hope this all helped, and if you have any questions, leave a comment below, and I try to read them all. If you'd like to, you can press the like button, or if you'd like to subscribe to my channel. I don't have too many videos as of now, but I will slowly try to work on more. So, this has been Tom Brown from the Fire Steel Forge, and we'll see you next time. Just one last note. One thing I forgot to mention was a lot of folks use antlers for building decorative items for their house, such as door pulls, drawer pulls, things like that. So keep this in mind also with the core and how soft the core is, such as mule deer. If you try to drive a screw through that core and you're going to be pulling on that antler a lot, it could rip the screw out of that core area. So whitetail would be a better choice for this. Moose and reindeer, caribou obviously, because they're a much denser, smaller core antler. So one more thing to keep in mind. Okay, thanks again. Catch you on the next one.